Hello, I'm Sora Luxon, and with tea in hand, this is lesson number 88. How would you define magic is one of the questions I'll be answering, but I think I'm going to call this lesson, based on some of the other questions I'll be answering, bells and attitude, or the strongest magical tool. So I'm not sure. I'll work on the title later. But one of the questions that I had pop up in my Instagram recently, which by the way has been flooded with strange, I guess they're called bots that do things on behalf of you that aren't you. So if you're looking at the Instagram account, just ignore those things, obviously. But how would you define magic was the question. Magic is understanding what you are, in my mind. It's a spiritual science, is another way of putting it, that there's an exacting training, a method, a methodology, a practice and application of it that is testable and rigorous, just like the scientific method would be, but that even more so, honestly, because with far less bias involved, hopefully. But it's a techne, that old Latin word, techne. The techne of magic is to produce and hone spiritual emanations, evolutions, correspondences. You're seeking comprehension of so many code words, but the divine. So that's how I would define magic. And what are the most powerful magical tools? Which is why I was trying to come up on the spot with a title really quick. So powerful magical tools. So what are the most powerful magical tools was the other question. How do you define magic and powerful tools? So this is a great ask. Because people will, even I will, when asked this question, start getting into the implements of magic, perhaps what's on your altar inside of your temple. Do you have columns? Do you have an Alexandrian altar with a silver chalice? Do you have, right? These are all tools, but in another way, the lesser known, or I would say the more overlooked things aren't, these magical tools the way we think of them that way, and spells that people tend, to focus on while wholly overlooking really important things like attitude, right? You are your mind. You are your mental states. And that can be very overwhelming because right there, I am the manifester of my reality. It can feel very big to a lot of people, or very vague. So to simplify it somewhat, I would say one of the, if not the most powerful magical tool at your disposal in some ways is your attitude. It carries an energetic signature. It has the most direct influence magically over any other effect that you might be trying to produce. For instance, you can do ceremonial and ritual work every day, and I hope you are, and if you are, you know what the benefits of that is. But you could do that, say, for 3 hours one morning, like really go at it hard, add in all the planetary influence access, anointing candles with sacred oils, doing intentional, setting intentions with sigil craft and sigil work, do all these things on top of your ceremonial rites in order to have, say, an extra fortuitous or lucky day or a beneficiary outcome for some specific situation. And then you leave your house. And immediately what I see people, even people that I'm engaged in temples with watching their practices, begin to forget their power almost immediately. It's almost like so many people go to church and they think going to church somehow makes them a good person. Going to church doesn't make you a good person every Sunday any more than standing in a garage turns you into a car, right? It's that common kind of way of thinking about that. You actually have to take principles and mindsets away from a place with you. And the same thing works with magic. So the second, neos leave their temple and the magic is set, they begin to misplace their mastery or slowly allow themselves to be dragged into, we're surrounded with it. If you're alive in this time while I'm recording this in this moment on this material plane, This is a realm where the sane are perceived as insane, and the material, it has become chaotic energetically. So you're surrounded by, let's say, less than benefic energetic signatures most of the time. You have, these ignorance levels, and there are levels of vibratory frequency that are banal or apathetic or depressed. Again, ignorant, irritable, impatient. Perhaps the tones of those around you are filled with fears, aggressions, insecurities, doubts, confusion. And now you're in their sphere of influence. Now, because you've left your temple, you've left your ceremonies, you've walked out into the world, and now how do you hold on to it out in the world in real life situations? So now you're resonating with these very powerful, to think that they're not powerful, even when they're subtle, even when they seem minor or small over and over again, that doesn't mean they aren't powerful. People are walking around with a lot of power that they're influencing others with, and it's not always good power. So good and bad, again, it's two sides of the same penny there, but I think you understand my meaning. So now you've been around it and you're resonating and very much being controlled by them, or at the very least resonating with their projected mental states. And so your attitude, to put it simply, has now changed. You're not in that same frame of mind when you were surrounded by, blessed incense smoke in your highest evolutionary mental state, visualizing, light descending through your, your neural system. So the great majesty and power of your mental state gets dissipated or becomes dissolved or lost or dispersed. The moment you are cursing in traffic, no matter how many ceremonies you did in the morning, or you're short with the cashier or the receptionist, you're scattered is another way to put it. When you're not focused and you're not working with intention, when we go into quote unquote zombie mode or automatic pilot, those sorts of things, once you're doing that, and maybe mentally poorly dialoguing, dwelling on problems rather than solutions, thinking about things that are wrong or that could go wrong, if you're someone who deals maybe perhaps a lot with anxiety and hasn't actually approached dissolving that in your magic yet. So, or worrying about things that will go wrong. Again, worry. That's you throwing away your most powerful tool, your most powerful wand, your sharpest athame, your spelled and consecrated, a dagger sword of magical weaponized will. Your attitude, when it shifts, and so with it, all of your power and ability to choose how to create events, how to pursue your next universal lesson, how to, originate and manifest your day. And I'm just as guilty as anyone else, right? It happens to us all. But once your attitude shifts, you've let go of all that potential. So now, is that to say that the specific rituals you did that morning aren't going to work? That very specific, say you did a ceremony with a candle or sigil work to arrive on time somewhere, maybe to reduce traffic conditions or make sure you get there on time without any hindrances, and then have a specific good meeting or outcome from meeting with someone. Maybe it's work related. But that spelled effect that you set in magical stone in the morning, in this example, with your rituals or sigil craft, planetary work, candle work, is that to say it won't work? No. Even if your attitude has changed, your attitude at this point, say it's 2 p.m. now, and you're arriving at this meeting, it can be dirt poor. And if you did your magic with full intention and emotion in the morning, then it's still going to work. It's still going to have its desired effect despite you. That's one of the great things about magic. Is somehow or another, despite your bad attitude, despite everything else seemingly going wrong, despite maybe 5 accidents on the freeway and and 9 other things that were trying to divert your attention, suddenly they will all evaporate. So all those specific things, that specific event is going to turn out as willed and intended if, again, you did your magic correctly. It will be sudden. It will seem like an oddly bright spot in an otherwise not great day, a moment of sudden optimistic outcome. In a way, right before you fall. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm doing that dyslexic. One word turns into another. I do that a lot too when I'm moving between different languages, especially between, say, Italian and Spanish back to English. When I come back into English, very often, I will become almost like phonetic in my pronunciations. Like I'll say Jung instead of Carl Jung. Like I'll pronounce things the way they're written alphabetically while my mind's switching between different language sets. But sorry, that's all me explaining to you how I just ran 2 words together. So anyway, that event that you set your ceremony for is going to work if you did your magic right. But once it's happened, you're going to descend back into your funk. If you're not being aware of it, if you're not controlling it the same way you did all morning, perhaps, and maybe even you're in gratitude. So you're grateful for maybe a little bit, but then that thing that you had happen, that you willed to happen, and you're so impressed by, your magical prowess, you're going to forget that state very quickly, or at least let go of it, release it, and allow the states, again, of the patterns around you to take hold, to take precedence, to take priority, and in many ways to take over you, to take control of you again. So how many times have I seen this with neophytes, that they set on learning planetary correspondences powerfully, or sigil magic powerfully, and they are so thrilled at the ability to say of their anointing candle work, or emboldened by the blue fire of their ritual athames, wall in lodge or in temple, or but just then throwing their most valuable magical tool out the window on the daily. And when you're around companions that are new to the craft, that are working with this aspect of their learning curve, you could say struggling, but they're not struggling. They're working through the lessons that the universe is bringing them. But they're struggling, say, to comprehend why their magic works, but their life overall doesn't seem to shift, or why it can't remain that way all the time. Their days don't seem to have an overall improvement, even though their magic has an effect and works very specifically when they want it to, and they can see that and they know it, but they can't yet wrap their head around why those fleeting epiphany type of moments of such great gratitude and majesty, right? The grace of the powers they called upon themselves. And they wonder, why does that have to end? Why do I then go out in the world and I can't function the way I do in my consecrated space, or when I'm alone in a purified mental state? Why can't I bring that out to the world? Well, you can, right? So the thing is, but they don't, right? They aren't thinking that state can be held onto ad nausea and can be applied across the board. And it can. The same calm and balance you feel while doing your depolarizing work, or your chakra work for those Vedic ancients among us, maybe those who work with the Sri Jabala Darshana Upanishad or in their magics, or perhaps you work with the glowing grace experience by the highest purified forms of a higher self or self-awareness. The Silver Star, Rosicrucian orders, there are many orders that work with heavy visualizations to other planes, or partake in doing breathing work or mantra work, or any of these visualization practices. There's so many intuitive practices. Maybe perhaps you're even in work with a group, or independently in your own space privately. Maybe you're a solo practitioner and you work in high ceremony to don the mantle of the holies. to the fullness of understanding and acceptance that washes through us in ceremonies when we call the great avatars onto us in present presence. That could be Tahuti, that could be Thoth. All of these magical effects don't have to be fleeting. The greater purpose of magic, no matter what tradition you're coming from, and I always try to mention that, I don't think we do a bigger disservice to ourselves in the occult than when we break ourselves down into smaller traditions that can't correspond with each other or communicate with each other or respect and partake in the wisdom and traditions of each other. So I always try to, even though we're all different, I try to kind of lump us into a unified whole in a sense that we're all occultists. So anyway, when you're aware of, that the great purpose, the great work in part is to train the will, to hone the spiritual self, to evolve one's awareness into a constant state of being and comprehension, right? To embody these greater principles, to have the epiphanies that spawn dramatic, holistic ascensions within us. And again, many code words, ways of describing that, healing and evolving your DNA or creating a higher vibratory mental state from what was to what is and can always be. So yes, your magic will work if done rightly. In this example, that is, if you've done your magic in the morning, that morning, with incredible emotive, energetic force and intentions. But what about the rest of the day before and after that moment, when your magic was working? So what about everything that preceded it and came after it, a priori and post priori? What about the poor attitude one falls back into maybe all too quickly after the wanted magical outcome happens? So that it seems like that's the pendulum swing or the shift or the blip is the good thing in comparison to the 90% of the norm or the bad or the lower state. So yay, I showed up on time to this meeting that I set my magic for, despite my miserable morning and my miserable midday. And it did go well, the meeting. I got what I wanted to have happen. And I was aware and grateful of that for about 60 seconds, 5 minutes, 10 whole minutes afterward. Impressed that my magic worked. Grateful that the universe allowed for the outcome and for my own abilities and all those energetic pathways and potentials to present themselves that led to said outcome. And then I moved on with my day. And it became miserable again, or boring again, or just the same again. Same as always, right? Pretty quickly again after that. See? Eeyore effect. That's what it is. So there's things that happen when you are oblivious to your internal attitude. It gets in the way of your magic. That's just how it is. It does. Everything and everyone else is allowed to run you and your life when you are oblivious to your attitude. You are giving up the greater power also that real masters have of applying intentional will and your mental creations moment to moment, almost passively. The masters, it almost becomes it is their norm and it is their ready state. So it almost seems passive. That the best possible effects in their lives, in their days, in their personal evolution are always being realized. So imagine being able to do 1,000 ceremonies every morning to have the best effect for every single moment of your day, and all those opportunities and outcomes magically always presenting to you. And then everything always going your way because you had applied a magical ritual to every single thing so that it would go that way. Imagine that, but without the ceremonies, without ever having to do the ceremonies. That's what you're giving up. That is what you're giving up when you don't control your attitude. And magic loathes disengagement. Energetic power loathes you being turned off or turning your brain off, or when you tune out. I'm trying to think of all the ways people might phrase this. When you're divesting yourself of magic, when you're tuning out of energies and focus and intention, they're also tuning out of you. So again, code words, right? You could call it being in a low vibration, where you only resonate with and call low vibrations into your reality. If you aren't, say, energetically engaged in your practice, that's another way that you could talk about it. Like, if you're a ceremonial hermetic magician and you do movement-based ritual, you can shout, dance, wave your arms, burn incense all you want. Well, there's never a bad time to burn incense, honestly. In many ways, incense can be a passive clearer as well, but you can do that all you want, and there isn't going to be, say, a celestial guardian that hears you, or a single whiff of blue fire that's going to anoint and spawn in your breast to be directed by you. Magic spills and disperses. It dissolves and dissipates. It disappears without focus. So if you aren't closing an energetic circuit with your attitude, you're definitely closing some other circuit, and you're not holding on to your magical energy throughout your day. There's a different type of energetic signature that's moving through you when you're not in control of your mental states. I don't want to get too much more into that in detail. I don't want to frighten anyone, but it is happening. So it's kind of like how dishonesty, lying, with intentional subjugation or manipulation of other individuals that you don't recognize as facets of a holistic reality, that dissolves your intuition. It destroys intuition. So like lying, dishonesty, in occultism, you learn very quickly that when you have to lie, you've given up your intuitive skills, pretty much, depending on the lie and its signature, for hours or perhaps days. So that's par for the course. If you're engaging in mental discognizance consciously, you're not going to have a lot of harmony subconsciously to recognize yourself as part of the greater whole. Or at least it could be there, but you're going to have a heck of a time accessing those subconscious harmonies and therefore being able to intuit certain things, which is why you learn to quickly avoid dishonesty and deceptive states. Same thing with poor attitude in magic. If your attitude is bad, you're going to have a heck of a time accessing even the smallest amount of power to apply to something on the spot in your day when you want to. You have to be in control of your attitude, of your mental state. People dabbling in the craft, those not fully accessing their own genuine, authentic abilities, looking up the candle spell online or the glamour spell online, or watching someone that's not a judgment against, donning yourself in any way you want, but people that put on the costumes, these figural costumes of, say, all black or goth or all witch or all warlock or all, I don't know, ancient Roman soldier, this costume that gives them what they feel is a sense of visual identity. So you know what I mean? They might not have fully grasped yet that it really doesn't matter, right? And that if anything, they're consciously presenting themselves to others in a way that can cause a lot of negating effects from what they really want. But when you have people who dabble or who aren't quite there yet, those are the same people generally, honestly, more than half of the time, I would say the people that still feel like they need to present themselves as magical beings on the material plane rather than, just putting on a suit and tie and going about their day, which is actually a much higher evolved form when you're not needing to scream to the heavens what you are. But they don't quite get to access these real power forms. They're kind of set in a self-conditioning of what magic is and how it works. So when they hear someone like me or anyone, any, big or small, child or old, experienced or non-experienced person talk about something like attitude being important, there's often usually a cognitive shift where they go inside. This is like a self-help book, or oh Lord, what hokum, right? Like they'll say they have these again, if you've been conditioned and you're not in control of yourself and of approaching things in order to gain access to them and then make unbiased choices for yourself, they'll just flip a switch in their heads. It's very automatic for them that this sounds like a self-help book. Oh, it's all about attitude. Is it? Oh, how cheesy, how hippie, how hoodoo, magic nonsense, Tibetan. This is the way a lot of people will approach this concept, while also thinking and understanding that things like sigil craft are very powerful and work very well. So it's so they think it's not magic in a way, or that it doesn't matter, or that it's less important somehow. But attitude is far more important than any sigil you're right, or any candle you're anointing, or months of ceremonial work. Again, we don't break bad habits. We replace them with what we'd prefer to have be there. So, and so they don't get access to these power forms. Your attitude, like so much else, it is something that we as individuals don't always stop to consider. And when you're an occultist, you need to start thinking to yourself, all these tools I'm learning, say like the tool of visualization, how can it be applied for my personal use? How can it be made into an actual sword? For instance, or any other tool. I don't want it to sound so violent, but symbolically, a tool that can be wielded at will. You can create and apply visualization technique to things like calling forward a better attitude, or a more positive state of mind, or a present and high vibratory, confident, joyous skin, say, the way you'd apply a skin on a computer image, right? The same way you'd put on a mantle or an apron and don your magical powers. The same way you call forth blue fire in ritual ceremony. Let me do it for instance. For instance, I know one warlock, as he labels himself, that's what he chooses to call himself, who has created what he calls a shine form. And I remember the first time I heard this, it immediately reminded me of The Shining, and I had to pull myself back mentally from that, reassess the word, and try to undo some of that conditioning in my own mind. But he calls it a shine form, where he can quickly visualize and then pull what he's crafted in his magics to be this kind of sparkling. He describes it as a glowing, like a shining, powerful form. Like if you know cartoons like Dragon Ball Z characters, that they kind of like radiate this fiery power when they're like powering up. I don't know a better way of expressing this. That's how he explained it to me, that it's his attitude shift tool. So he has a specific object that he has hidden on the astral that he can then mentally go pick up. And I'm not going to tell you what that object is. I'm not going to get into details and specifics. No one should ever be involved in anyone else's magic in that personal of a way, unless they've opted into it and all of that. But he can pick this object up mentally, visually, visualization mentally. And it results in his honed will, his attitude changing here on the material plane instantaneously. So when he feels really bad or really sad or really angry, he can go to a specific place, find this object, pick it up, and change his attitude at will. And then he has specific words of power to release it if it becomes too draining, because he's not as balanced as he needs to be, or because he needs to sleep, or is needs to be more aware of other things in his life. So he's working out the kinks actively right now of applying this in a way where, rather than it being like a coat he picks up and puts on and takes off again, that instead he's trying to work out how to have it become part of his skin. Which again, you have to be careful how you use your magics, because you can create things like objects, totems, charms that you become all too dependent on that actually might be barring you from higher forms of magic. So that's something that he's working with right now. But he has used visualization, for lack of a better word, that can be just applied to everyone in a knowing way, to create a way he can always reach for a higher state of self, to become an instantaneous, more aware and present being, even when he's in the worst frame of mind. So with his, he can change from being very upset to being very balanced and just razor honed into the most beautifully calm and powerful presence by use of this magical tool, which he has crafted and implemented in his life in this way. So he can use it in that way. And as I said, he's still working out the kinks. But the speed, watching him do this over, the last 2.5 years, the speed of his personality's evolution, of his evolution as a spiritual being, is astounding because of the way he has engaged this particular magical tool. And now he's moving beyond the need of it, but of just visualizing and creating these things that can be accessed willfully. It's an amazing thing. Again, that's something magic can give you, that you can apply it in different ways. You can't be in a room with this individual and not know that you're in the presence of a very powerful being that is evolving very rapidly. So the optimism projected into space around him versus his energies, even as little as 2.5 years ago, it's like being around the great masters. That's a way of describing it. If you've ever been around one of the great masters, they influence others simply through presence, simply through non-direct spatial contact. They seem to draw everything around them up the ladder, so to speak, just by being near them. And they're not always the people you think they are, but they're out there, and they really can, I don't want to say enforce evolution, but they can help people that might be barring themselves from evolving states. They can kind of speed things up. So my point is, with this person that I'm talking about, he did this, right? You can do that kind of thing with magic. And yes, it is magic. That is very high level occult magic. Far from being, when I'm talking about crafting a magical object and setting it in a hidden place on the astral plane and applying words of power so that it can be turned on and off at will, that's magic. That is occultism. That is high level, if you want to call it spell work or meditative work, whatever you want to call it. And it's not self-helpy, right? Your attitude, it's a tool. It's a magical tool. It is an element of you, of your mentality. All is mind. So you're either using it or you're not. And if you aren't, you are missing the point entirely. And you got to get there. You're chasing some illusion or another. You're playing dress up. You're on the outskirts, on the edges, just barely noticing that there's something going on and trying to start to mess with it. The way you really start to, quote unquote, mess with it is when you realize how important something like your attitude is. That is when you start to step into yourself, into your own shoes. But I will say this. So when you stop anointing candles for things like new tires on your car, when you start anointing them for things like, remind me despite myself throughout my day to have an awareness of my attitude and the ability to willfully and instantaneously shift it at will. That's when you start playing with the big boys. Now you're really starting to play with the big powers of magic. That's when the inner temple doors begin to creak open just a little bit and you begin sneaking peeks of things, brilliant, golden, shining images behind those doors, just through that little crack that you haven't even dreamt of or even considered before were possible to access. That is where your real skills and your powers, whether you want to talk to someone across distances, know what's going to happen before it happens, find an object no one else can see, start looking at your attitude. Start doing ceremonies to bring awareness of attitude into yourself, right? So we love talking about keys and doors, right? In Hermeticism, in Western traditional ceremonial magics, in Wicca, in any kind of magic, right? Thresholds and keys, master keys and doors. The good fortune spells and that help my brother heal from that illness that he has, in this one lifetime. Those things were just to get you here. They were to get you wandering around this magical building, knocking and banging on everything in order to access more. Once you understood that something was here, there is something to it, and you could do things with it. And now you're knocking over tables and rattling chains and knocking as hard as you can on every door, yelling, "Open up!" Right? I want to see more. So that one of those keys begins when you realize that things like attitude are, I'm very realistically, when you know how to work with your own energy, they're golden tridents imbued with the most holy of holy sigils and symbols, and laying hands on yours, whether it's a sword or I don't know, a box that you open, or when you start picking yours up to use on purpose, that's where you begin to step into your real power, your real abilities magically. And as far as powerful tools, I also need to mention bells. Overlooked all the time, bells. So going from the big important thing, all is mind, let's drop back down into what should be in your temple, on your altar, in your home. What's an actual powerful, quick use tool that really does matter that gets overlooked? Bells. Or if you can afford a crystal bowl, a Tibetan singing bowl in your environment for daily use. You see this a little bit in movies, but you gotta love how the Holly's wood is always trying to tell the public something, but not really, right? So it gets overlooked a lot, even by real magicians. A lot in Western Hermeticism too. You'll see a lot of incense use and altar use or consecrated mirror use. You see all these tools, but not always will I see a bell in someone's home or, so much as a wind chime. Witches, I will say, are good about their bells. They are very good about their bells on their altar to ring in and out of consecrated space, especially Gardenian and Alexandrian witches. But they firmly pass forward that wisdom from generation to generation. And of course, in any Tibetan practice, the bell, the chime to focus and shift the mind, the sacred tones to clear energies, again, allow for evolution or the universe to exist in the first place. But say like in Constantine the movie, so there was a movie, remember when, I don't know if you've seen it, but somewhat based around the concepts of heaven and hell or as above so below, that Keanu Reeves is a warlock that deals with, celestial beings and Klippa, but he did, I think it was based off a comic book. So he's basically a magician. Not basically, he is. You'll even see some hermetic symbols in that film. But there's this mirror tree of life critter after him. If you're coming at this from a Kabbalah mindset, it's like made of bugs or something, and it's trying to push him in the street and get him killed by a car. It's manhandling him. It's managed to manifest outside of the lower plane partially by using lower elements to create this sort of shadow form. It's like a demonic thing. But Keanu, or Constantine, as his character is called in this film, he has this little moo cow noisemaker. You remember those from like the 80s or 90s that his friend gave him in the movie? It's where you flip it over and it goes moo. Right? I'm not doing it very well. But so it's like that little canister that lets out this noise very slowly as air repressurizes within the cylinder. Except his has a sacred screech beetle inside of it that his friend has given him for protection. So when he agitates this little canister, the beetle inside of it gets agitated by shaking this thing, and it screeches. And then the shadow form, this demonesque projection that's attacking him in this film, it falls apart. It falls to pieces, dissolves spontaneously, because it can't energetically hold itself together while being interfered with by certain tones. Sometimes universal tones that pass into nature, certain energetic vibrations that literally will dissolve other vibrations in space and time. So this little screech bug, this little beetle, makes this whole demon fall apart in this movie. But it's not a bad symbolic representation of how certain tones, sounds, harmonies, energetic vibratory signatures, chimes, bells, singing bowls actually do work and work amazingly well. And all too often I find it overlooked by my magical brethren in their home temples. There will not be so much as a chime. So sistrums and cymbals, cymbals just like we have on drum kits today, they were all over ancient Egypt. I mean, yes, they also had entire rooms built for harmonic healing, but everyone had a sistrum in their home or a cymbal at their front door or hung above an archway or the entryway to living spaces. Certain noises to clear the space and or influence the mind in a very direct and powerful way. In Myanmar, the population still drives out evil by banging metal together. Forced cacophony, when directed purposefully, is no small thing. Except now they use pots and pans because that's the metal they have access to, and it's to drive out tyrannical political figures from office. That's the current pervasive evil that they're trying to disperse. So they know what they're doing, right? That tradition didn't come from nowhere. Churches have bells for a reason. And it isn't because they decided long ago, like one priest said, I want to spend a ton of resources financially making pretty noises for the population around this building to enjoy. That is not where the tradition comes from. You can go look into it. It's not how bells above churches, above township doorways began. A metal bell, even a small one, like those you might just ding a little bell when you open a door to patronize a shop, right? They can cut through stagnant energy like a scythe. It's just, I cannot express more the importance. If you don't yet have a bell or a chime or even a small bowl or something that resonates a tone, tuning forks are very powerful. That I would say. On top of attitude, again, priority one, very important, but in a different way. If you're talking about material tools, chime, bell, cymbal, all these things, very overlooked, very useful. Until next time.